I used to love our home. Every little detail was mine, from the scent of lavender by the entryway to the mismatched coffee mugs I collected over the years. It was my sanctuary, my safe space, until she moved in. My mother-in-law didn't just walk through the door, she took over. She brought her own curtains and said mine were too depressing. She threw out the plates I bought and replaced them with an actual adult set. She never asked. She just did, like it was her house. Because according to her, I was lucky to marry her son, and the least I could do was keep a proper house. Her words, not mine. I wasn't her daughter-in-law. I was the maid, the cook, the punching bag. Every chore that wasn't done to her liking was a personal offense. Every dinner I made was too salty and too dry, or not how real women cook. And somehow my husband never saw the problem. He called it traditional values. He said, she just wants to help. Help. Number. She wanted control, and little by little she got it. Until I found myself tiptoeing in my own kitchen, apologizing for how I folded towels and asking permission to sit on my own damn couch. I felt like a stranger in my home. Like I was constantly auditioning for a role I didn't even want. And still, I stayed quiet. I kept my head down. I convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. But everyone has a breaking point. And mine came the day she humiliated me in front of my husband's entire extended family, calling me the live-in help like it was a joke. That's when I knew something had to change. And it did. Because if she thought I was just the maid in this house, she had no idea what the maid was about to do. At first I made excuses for her. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she didn't know better. Maybe it was her generation. But excuses only go so far. The real unraveling started the day she moved in. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months while she got back on her feet after her husband passed. I was sympathetic. Grief makes people act out. What I didn't realize was that I was inviting someone in who had no intention of ever leaving. Within a week, she had taken over the master bathroom, said the guest one hurt her knees. Then she started napping in our bedroom during the day, saying our daughter's room had too much light. She called it her space. My bedroom. My bed. She began telling neighbors she had moved back in to help run the house. I only found out when our neighbor said, "You must be glad your mother-in-law is in charge now." It stung. At first it was little things, criticizing my outfits, throwing away my groceries for being junk, even though they were organic. One day I caught her going through my drawers. She claimed she was looking for pillowcases. My journal had been moved. I felt watched, scrutinized, judged. Eric, my husband, brushed it off. That's just how she is. But she knew exactly what she was doing. If I told our daughter no candy, she'd hand her a cookie with a wink. Mommy's uptight today. I started dreading weekends. Coming home felt like walking into enemy territory. One night I got home late and found the entire kitchen rearranged. Spices alphabetized, pots restacked, my coffee machine shoved into a cabinet. I begged her not to touch my kitchen again. She smiled sweetly. "You're welcome, dear. Just trying to bring some order to the chaos." That night I cried in my car for an hour. Then came the dinner party. She told one of Eric's co-workers that she runs the household since my daughter-in-law isn't quite domestic. Eric stayed silent. I was humiliated. But the final straw came at church. I had just finished volunteering with the kids when I walked into the fellowship hall and heard her telling a group of women how exhausting it was to keep things together in a house where no one lifts a finger but me. Every woman turned and looked at me with that pitying and judgmental half-smile. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just walked out. And as I sat in the car, hands gripping the wheel, one thought ran through my head. She's winning. She was taking over my home, my voice, my marriage, inch by inch. And no one was stopping her. Not even me. But that was about to change. Change didn't come all at once. It crept in day by day, quiet, icy, unstoppable. The first step was subtle. I stopped trying to win her over. No more fake laughs at her passive-aggressive comments. No more tiptoeing around her moods. When she criticized my pasta for being bland, I calmly said, "You're welcome to make dinner tomorrow." When she tossed out my favorite coffee mug because it had a tiny chip, I retrieved it from the trash, washed it, and placed it front and center in the cabinet. Each small act of defiance felt like breathing after holding it in for too long. She noticed, and she didn't like it. She started retaliating in petty ways, leaving passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, forgetting to pass along messages from school, and once even dumping out a basket of my freshly folded laundry with a smirk. Instead of reacting, I calmly picked up the laundry, took it outside, and threw the entire load in the trash. Her jaw dropped. I looked her in the eye and said, "Guess it wasn't worth saving." I could see the confusion on her face. She couldn't decide if I was unraveling or becoming dangerous. Truth is, I was doing both. She tried a new tactic, framing me. She began secretly recording me, hoping to catch an outburst. But I saw the glint of her phone camera tucked into the bookshelf. I played along, let her believe she was clever. Then I set up my own defenses. A tiny camera hidden in a fake plant in the kitchen. A voice recorder tucked behind the living room books. Every cruel word, every manipulative whisper, every instant she twisted my daughter's thoughts against me. I caught it all. And I didn't stop there. I began documenting everything. I created a private cloud drive, uploaded the recordings, photos, date-stamped notes. I shared the folder with my sister, my best friend, and even a lawyer friend I trusted, just in case. If this turned into war, I wasn't going in unarmed. The most damning piece? A phone call I recorded where she bragged to her sister, "She's so easy to push around. I give it a month before Eric kicks her out. If not, I'll make him think she needs help. Play the mental health card. Easy win." I felt like vomiting when I first heard it, but instead of crumbling, I saved the file under the name Checkmate. While I built my arsenal, I started rebuilding myself. I signed up for a kickboxing class. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I needed to hit something that wouldn't bruise my soul. I started wearing clothes that made me feel strong, not hidden. I cut my hair, not for style, but to shed the weight of who I used to be. When she said, "That haircut isn't very wifely," I replied, "Good. I'm not trying to be your wife." I invited friends over again. Friends I hadn't seen in years because I was too embarrassed to let them witness my home life. She called them bad influences. I called them oxygen. Eric noticed. Of course he did. "You've changed," he said one night. "You're cold." I turned to him and said, "I'm not cold. I'm clear. If that scares you, maybe you were more comfortable with me when I was broken." He didn't respond. Our marriage didn't improve. But I stopped caring about that. I no longer lived to make Eric feel comfortable while I suffered in silence. If he wanted to follow his mother off an emotional cliff, I wasn't going with him. But perhaps the biggest shift was with my daughter. I poured time into her, we made art projects, planted a small garden. I taught her how to bake cookies from scratch, just the two of us. When my mother-in-law tried to insert herself, I gently but firmly said, "This is our time, please respect that." And for once, she had no response. Then came the allies, one by one, like tiny lanterns in the dark. Our neighbor Beth told me she once caught my mother-in-law talking about me at the community center, calling me unstable and unfit. Beth said she didn't believe it then, and now she was certain it was all lies. Another neighbor, Paul, said she tried to prevent his kids from playing at our house, warning them that I wasn't well. Even Eric's own cousin pulled me aside at a family gathering and whispered, "I used to think you were the problem, but after seeing how she treats everyone, I get it now. I'm sorry." Each story built me back up. Each whispered apology, each knowing look from someone who saw the truth, stitched up the parts of me that had been torn down. I wasn't alone, I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't powerless. Every time she insulted me in private, I smiled. Every time she tried to provoke me, I breathed deeply, because I had a plan now. And when I moved, I would move decisively. This house was mine too, and soon the world would know exactly who she was, and who I had become. I waited. Not out of fear, but for precision. Revenge isn't just about making someone hurt. It's about making sure they understand why. She kept pushing day after day, oblivious to the fact that I had turned every room in the house into a chessboard. Every move she made, every cruel remark, every lie whispered into my husband's ear. I documented it, and I smiled, because the more she showed her true self, the stronger my case became. I didn't want just a moment of satisfaction. I wanted consequences. I wanted her exposed. It began with a letter. I wrote it carefully, professionally, addressed to the Homeowners Association, to our church board, and to the local women's committee she chaired. Attached to the letter were time-stamped clips, video and audio, of her calling me unfit, mentally unstable, of her plotting to have me removed from my home, of her mocking our neighbors, insulting their children, laughing at how easily she manipulated people. But I didn't send it yet. First, I made sure to let her feel invincible. I encouraged her to throw a party at our house, a little get-together for the neighborhood. She loved showing off. I told her she deserved it. I acted sweet, compliant. I helped her plan it, let her believe she was queen of her castle. The night of the party, I wore red, her least favorite color on me. She always said it made me look cheap. I wore it anyway. With heels and confidence, I welcomed guests, laughed, played the perfect hostess. And all night, I watched her squirm as people complimented me. Then after dessert, I stood up and said I had a short video to share, something funny about our family life. She looked confused, curious. She didn't know I had synced my phone with the living room TV, and then I pressed play. What followed was 5 minutes of clips. Her voice, her insults, her cruelty, her admitting to using my mental health as a weapon, her calling our neighbors' kids little rats, her saying, "I run this house because my daughter-in-law is too spineless to stop me." The room went dead silent. She stood up, sputtering, face red. "This is out of context! This is manipulated!" But I wasn't done. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table, copies of transcripts, QR codes linking to the cloud drive, a list of names of people she'd insulted, people she thought wouldn't talk. And then I looked her in the eye and said, "This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. You wanted control? Now you get to see what losing it looks like." Eric didn't say a word. He looked like a ghost. Pale. Hollow. The party ended quickly after that. People whispered. Eyes avoided hers. And she stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. But that was just the beginning. I sent the letter the next day. To the HOA, the church board, the women's group. A few of them tried to stay neutral, but most were horrified. She was asked to step down from her position at the committee. Her social invitations dried up overnight. People started talking. The woman who once ran every room she entered suddenly found doors closing in her face. And at home, things were different too. Eric tried to spin it, tried to say I had gone too far, that airing dirty laundry in public was cruel. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "What's cruel is letting someone dismantle your wife piece by piece while you call it keeping the peace." He didn't argue after that. She stayed silent for weeks, barely left her room. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then came the final move. I filed for a legal separations of the home. Not a divorce, not yet. But I wanted my name, my space, my life clearly drawn out. She could no longer claim to be a resident. She was a guest now, one whose welcome had run out. I gave her 30 days to move out, legally. She tried to protest, but the documents were airtight. Every recording, every log, every witness lined up perfectly. Even Eric didn't fight it. He knew he couldn't. The day of the party, I wore the red dress she hated, with confidence. Hair pulled back, head held high. As guests arrived, she flitted from group to group, basking in their attention. I played the doting daughter-in-law, smiled, served lemonade, kept everything perfect. Then just as lunch ended and people were gathering near the patio, I stepped up. "I'd like to show a little video," I said, tapping my phone. The TV inside lit up. She froze. The video began. Clips of her voice calling me a burden, a weakling, not worthy of Eric. A montage of her berating me in the kitchen. Her sneering face as she whispered to the camera, "I control everything here. She just doesn't know it yet." Gasps echoed. Forks dropped. Someone actually muttered, "Oh my God." She lunged for the remote, but I was faster. I shut the video down myself, then walked to the table and placed a folder on top. Inside, printed statements from neighbors she insulted, copies of her texts, church newsletter excerpts, and a letter addressed to the women's group, the church board, and the HOA committee. "For your review," I said calmly. She exploded, yelled at that it was all fake, that I'd manipulated her. Eric stood frozen. His mother was unraveling in front of a live audience. And that's when I handed him my final gift, a flash drive. "Everything's on here. If you want to know the truth, really know it, watch it, or don't. That's up to you. But I'm done protecting someone who never once protected me." People began to leave. Some looked ashamed for ever believing her charm. Others patted me on the back. A few whispered, "Good for you." The aftermath was brutal. For her. The HOA removed her from the board. The church put her on indefinite leave. Her social calendar disappeared overnight. Even her Facebook was flooded with passive-aggressive questions like, "Is everything okay? Saw some interesting things." At home, silence. Eric tried to mend things. But I had stopped trying. I moved forward with filing for legal separation of the property. Not a divorce yet, but lines were drawn. I petitioned the court to have her removed from the premises, citing emotional abuse, which I backed up with recordings and witness statements. It held up. Legally, she had 30 days to vacate. She tried to appeal. It didn't work. She tried to guilt Eric. He refused to intervene. She even tried to spin the narrative online, but screenshots, timestamps, and reality were against her. And 30 days later, I watched her carry out the last of her bags. No dramatic speech, no final insult, just a look, one that burned with hatred and disbelief, like she couldn't understand how the woman she once dismissed had just destroyed her kingdom. As she stepped off the porch, I called out, "We genuinely wish you peace. Just not here." And then I shut the door. I sank into the couch, my daughter curled beside me, and felt a silence so complete it hummed in my bones. Not emptiness, not revenge, just clarity, because I had taken back my space. And more than that, I had taken back myself. Peace didn't arrive with fanfare. It came slowly, like sunlight through heavy curtains, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. There were no fireworks, no movie-ending moment, just a deep, unshakable quiet. The house felt different without her. Lighter. I could breathe again without bracing for passive-aggressive landmines. My daughter laughed more. She asked fewer anxious questions. Even our dog seemed more relaxed, curling up beside me instead of hiding under furniture. Eric and I coexisted, but we were different people now. Something between us had fractured beyond repair. I didn't hate him. I just didn't trust him. Not after all those years of silence, of choosing comfort over a courage. He moved out 2 months later. It was calm, civil. We agreed on shared custody. He said he needed time to process everything. I didn't stop him, because honestly, I needed time too. Time to figure out who I was when I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. I took a sabbatical from work, used the time to rebuild, painted the living room a warm gold, got rid of the formal dining set his mother loved, replaced it with a cozy wooden table that felt like us. I turned our guest room into a reading nook with bookshelves, beanbags, and a no drama allowed sign on the door. I started seeing a therapist, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to stay whole. I unpacked the years of small wounds and swallowed anger, and learned how to forgive myself for staying silent so long. And then something unexpected happened. People reached out, women from church, old co-workers, even a few strangers online. They said, "Thank you for standing up. I saw myself in your story. I wish I had your strength." But I always answered the same way. You don't need to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the quietest resistance is the most powerful of all. Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming space, reclaiming voice, reclaiming self. My daughter deserves to grow up in a home where strength isn't mistaken for cruelty, and where silence isn't confused with weakness. She deserves to see her mother stand up, not just against someone toxic, but for something better. And I deserve that too. So if there's a moral to the story, it's this. Never underestimate the woman you tried to silence, because one day she might rise, and when she does, she won't need to scream. She'll simply stand. She thought she was running in my house. I just let her dig her own grave brick by brick. And what's your final straw moment that made you stand up for yourself?